Hi, I'm Jesper Wilhelmsson, and welcome to my session today, your guide to OpenJDK development. I'm one of the process curators at Oracle that is looking at development processes and how to work with OpenJDK development. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. So what is the OpenJDK? Well, basically, the OpenJDK is a collection of projects where that is intended to improve the Java platform. Oracle is the maintainers of the OpenJDK and has been contributing a lot to the project, and we have a lot of developers working on it full time. Oracle has also historically been hosting source mirrors and test infrastructure for the OpenJDK community to use. Now lately we have started to move the source repositories over to GitHub, but still there are some repositories that is still hosted by Oracle. Obviously the OpenJDK have a lot of other contributors as well, both companies and private individuals, and hopefully there will be even more contributors after this talk. The OpenJDK consists of groups, and these groups are people that enjoy working on in the same area as each other, interested in the same things, and want to contribute to these particular areas. So one group could, for instance, be interested in 2D graphics and work on the 2D graphics libraries in Java. Other people might be interested in the virtual machine and work in the JDK group. These groups can sponsor projects, and the projects is where most of the actual work is happening in the community. So, for instance, we have the JDK project, which is where the new features and the main line of Java development is hosted. We also have the JDK updates project, which is focused on the JDK update releases, the LTS, JDK 11, JDK 8, and other update releases. The projects can also be focused on specific features, like, for instance, the Amber project, which is looking at language features and developing new language features in the Java language. Or OCAJ, which is focusing on a single garbage collection algorithm within the virtual machine. There can other kinds of projects can be like the Code Tools projects, which is developing tools for the OpenJDK developers to use. And there are also projects like Duke, which is basically hosting a bunch of images of our mascot, Duke. And of course, there is a project for the developer's guide as well. And this project is maintaining and updating the online document that describes developer processes for the OpenJDK. Projects usually have a mailing lists, which is where most of the work and discussions is going on. So basically, and that's like where you will start when you want to contribute to an OpenJDK project. The place to start is to join the mailing list and start reading and looking at what people are talking about in the different areas. There are several different ways to contribute to the OpenJDK. For instance, if you want to be active in the actual project, you can engage in discussions on the mailing lists, or you can participate in code reviews, or be active in the actual development of code and provide patches or ideas, or be part of the development process. But there are many other ways as well. You can, for instance, be a Java advocate or inform the public about what's happening within Java and within the language and in the community. And there are other ways to contribute. For instance, if you don't want to be very active yourself, but still want to contribute in some way, you can actually buy a subscription on Java. And that's a very easy way to just say, thank you, I like what you're doing, please continue. So a few words about educating and engaging. So it's a very good way of contributing to the OpenJDK community and to Java. For instance, you can write blog posts and news articles to review new features or say something about what's happening in a new release, or well, older stuff as well, of course, if there's something that you like to write about. If you're involved in teaching or education of some kind, maybe you can use Java as the language for assignments, or as an example of a software project. And actually using the OpenJDK as an example for software development classes that talk about process and how to perform development is actually a very good example, because the OpenJDK is a very open project, even compared to other open source projects. So not only is the source code open and available for anyone, we also have all our processes documented in the open, how to work with different things, how to do development and everything. All of that is documented in the open on public web pages and documents. And also all the development itself happens on public mailing lists. So you can actually follow all our internal discussions within the different development teams and see how a feature has evolved through the discussions. Another way to contribute could be to test the JDK, for instance, when a new release comes out, or just grabbing the latest EA build, early access build, that is released one each week. And try it out with your favorite framework or with your favorite Java application, and just see how it works. Does it work? If it works well, maybe even provide feedback back to the JDK developers. Most often the developers hear about things that go wrong if there's a bug or if something is not working. But getting feedback that says that, hey, I tried this and it worked, it was great. That's also very nice feedback to get from time to time. So that could be a good contribution as well. If you're trying out new features, new language features, and things that could affect your application, then please report back and tell us how. How did it affect your application? Did it improve performance, or did it have any effect on performance? What was the source code impact to use this new feature? Did you have to rewrite a lot of code in order to actually use the feature, or was it smooth and just start to use it without having to change too much? That's also very good feedback to get as a developer. If you want to contribute source code, you will have to sign the Oracle Contributor Agreement. This is an agreement that basically allows Oracle to use and distribute the source code, and is required by all open source projects at Oracle. So please sign it, and it basically means that you will share the copyrights together with Oracle. So you're not losing anything, you just share the rights to publish the source code and so on. Organizations can sign for their members. So basically, maybe if you work at a company that is already doing OpenJDK development, it could be that your company already signed and you are covered by that. So check with your employer or other organization if you're involved in development. So one place to start when you want to join the OpenJDK community is to go check the OpenJDK website. So there you will find information about all different projects that is going on, and you will find information about basically anything, links to mailing lists, links to different guides and tutorials, and a lot of information on the OpenJDK wiki, for instance. The mailing lists is, as I mentioned before, the place to start. Find a project or something that you think sounds interesting, and then find the mailing lists that corresponds to that project. So a few examples on the slide here. Obviously, there are a lot more mailing lists on the server, so please go there and have a look. If you're interested in development of some area, those mailing lists that end with -dev are the ones that you probably are the most interested in. In the mailing lists, as I mentioned, everything is discussed, and everything happens on these mailing lists. So you will be able to read in the mailing list for some time to learn about the project and see how things work before you start to contribute or start to engage yourself. There's also archives that you can go look in to see if you want to read up on how things, how the environment looks like. Okay, so let's say you have an idea and you want to incorporate it into the OpenJDK. What's the best way to doing that? Well, again, always start on the mailing lists. That's where you should discuss things. That's where you should propose an idea and let the community engage and talk about your idea and see, is it solving the problem that you intend to solve? Is it something that we actually can incorporate into Java? There are a lot of different dependencies and constraints that any change in the language or in the Java, in the JDK needs to comply to. So there's always interesting, well, it's always important to discuss these things before you start to actually change source code. For smaller changes, we have something called request for enhancement. So that's something that you will find in the bug database, so in RFE, as we call them. These are for new things, but fairly small things. So, and small in this case, it means less than 2 weeks of engineering time or something like that. For anything a little bit larger, we have the JDK enhancement proposal. So that's what we usually call JEPs. And if you have been following Java development for some time or read up about what's new in Java releases, you have probably seen these JEPs before, because those are the ones that are usually highlighted when any new release comes out. These are, as I said, larger features or enhancements, changes that needs more visibility, that needs more discussion. So even something that it could be smaller changes as well, if these are controversial changes or changes that requires discussion or synchronization between several different areas, for instance. then the JEP document is a very good place to keep discussions and document anything that well involves this feature. For changes that is changing anything in the specification or anything in the Java APIs, we have a special process called the compatibility and specification review. This is also this process is needed to make sure that changes don't break Java applications or anything that is already running out there in the wild. The interfaces could be basically anything from the actual language, like syntax, or the APIs of classes, which methods are there, which public fields. But it could also be things like command line flags for the JVM, anything basically that is public that the user can see needs to go through one of these processes as well. Please note that create the PR on GitHub is not one of these options. Even though the source code is today available on GitHub, the process for working within the OpenJDK has not changed. We still use the mailing lists for all discussions, and a PR should not really be created until there is an agreement around some patch that should be contributed. So agreement around the IDE, at least. I mean, the code itself obviously needs reviewed once the PR is public. If you don't have your own IDE, you can find some issue to work on in the JDK bug system. So you'll find this online. It's public, so anyone have read access and can look through all the bugs and enhancement proposals and JEPs and everything that is stored in this database. You can search and do a lot of advanced queries in this. So for instance, if you have your area that you're interested in, you can search for issues that concerns this particular area. And if you look for a component and something where the assignee, for instance, is empty, you can find issues that is reported and someone thinks that they need fixing, but no one has assigned it, no one has grabbed that issue yet. We also have a couple of labels that can be searched for in this database. So for instance, we have a label called starter and another called cleanup. These indicate that an issue is a little bit smaller, maybe somewhat well contained, and is suitable for someone who is new to the code base. So if you want to dig into something and start looking and have some motivation to start reading source code, then these can be a good place to start. So once you propose an idea or publish a patch, you should always be prepared to update and change and well, be prepared to think again, as I labeled this slide. Any reviewer will have their own opinion on how to do things, and it's not necessarily that you are wrong or that they are wrong. There are many ways to do the same thing, but always make sure that you understand what the reviewer means. The reviewer most often has a point, and it's important to understand whatever, if there are questions or if there are concerns. Also, in this context, be aware of that the OpenJDK is a very large community, and it's a worldwide community. And a lot of the contributors and members of the community does not have English as their native language. So it's important to make sure that you understand what the questions are and what the comments are. And always be polite. The OpenJDK is a very friendly place. People always try to help out, and even if you ask questions in the wrong place, people usually point you in the right direction and try to help out anyway. So always be polite, even if you don't agree with what the reviewers are saying. There has been a tendency to kind of say that, well, once you're in this area and changing these things, do you mind changing that as well to fix up some other code that is nearby? Please say no when anyone suggests something like that. If you do additional changes that is not described in your original JBS issue, in the bug or in the enhancement proposal, well, you will need to update the JBS issue in that case, because any change that is done by the patch should be described by the JBS issue. And obviously, unrelated changes should really have their own issues. You shouldn't do multiple things in the same push, in the same patch. So once you start working on the source code and start contributing patches, there is a few different roles that you will climb through. So once you contributed a few initial changes, you may request to become an author. An author in the OpenJDK has the right to submit patches through a sponsor. So again, it's another reason why you should always discuss your changes on the mailing lists first, because the sponsor needs to be someone who is a committer or reviewer in the project. And in order to find this person and get the person engaged and interested in your change, you will need to have these discussions before you publish your patch. An author will also get write access to the JBS, the bug data system. And that's when you can start filing your own issues, reporting bugs that way. Once you have contributed something somewhere around 8 significant changes, for some definition of significant, you can ask for a vote, basically, so that you can become a committer. So this is done through a vote in the mailing lists, and other committers in the same project can say whether they want to allow you to become a committer or not. And you most often that's not really controversial in any way, as long as you have contributed a number of interesting changes. Once you have been in the project for quite some time and start to be experienced in the field, in knowing the code and knowing what's required by certain changes in the code, you can also become a reviewer. So the reviewer is someone who has the authority to actually approve change sets. So any change that is going into OpenJDK must be approved by a reviewer. So these are people that have been around for quite some time, are experienced in the field. Each project also have a project lead, and the project lead can be any committer, and this project lead is responsible for directing and coordinating the project's activities. So if there are any disagreements, for instance, around some changes, if a review of some patch gets stalled because there are different opinions on how to do things, the project lead can step in and basically decide which way to go. One person can have several different roles in different projects, can be member of many projects. So this is just an extract from the OpenJDK census that has all members and lists all their what they are doing in the OpenJDK. Okay, so in order to actually do some changes, you will need to download the source code, of course. You do this by cloning the JDK project from GitHub. Once you have done that, you also want to create your own fork of the JDK. At least if you want to push code and intend to actually make changes in the code. If you just want to build it and do your own local stuff and without pushing anything, then cloning the JDK as is just fine. But if you want to make your own changes, it's easier if you create your own fork on GitHub. And then if you actually do these small git commands that is listed on the slide here, that will basically mean that you rename the origin from the source code so that it's called upstream instead. And you add a new remote called origin that points to your fork of the JDK source. This will allow GitHub and the GitHub bots to understand that your fork is downstream from the JDK project. And when you push something into your fork, you will get help from the GitHub bots to create the PR, stuff like that. Remember to always work in branches. So that was this last GitHub git command, git checkout is doing. It's creating a new branch for your specific fix. Once you made your change, you probably want to build the OpenJDK as well. Doing that requires a few additional tools. So first of all, you configure. Basically, that sets up the environment and make sure you have all the tools needed for building the JDK. You will need a recent boot JDK. You will need compilers for the specific platform that you're on. And there will be some additional packages required depending on what platform you're on. The configure script will actually be fairly helpful in telling you which packages is needed, and in some cases also how you can actually get hold of those packages. Then simply use make to build the OpenJDK. There are several different make targets. I like to target images because that gives you something that is very close to the JDK that is actually shipped as a bundle if you download the JDK from some vendor that is providing JDKs. You will get something very similar to that by building images. Obviously, if you work in a specific area and make changes in only that area and want to get a quick build of those bits only, there are other make targets that you can use to build just specific parts of the JDK. One very common question is if there is any IDE support for OpenJDK. It's the JDK source code. It's a fairly large code base, but basically it works in any modern IDE, I would say. I haven't heard any IDE that can't handle it, at least. So as for all I know, it works in all of them. Some of these do have support that comes with the source code. So for instance, if you use Oracle Developer Studio, that has project files in there already. And there are some other as well. The Code Tools project provides project files for IntelliJ. And NetBeans should have built-in support for OpenJDK, or at least that's what has been claimed in the past. So there is a link to an email here that describes how to set up the source code with NetBeans. One thing to remember, of course, is that the JDK consists of both Java code and C++ code. And as far as I know today, there is no IDE that can actually work with both Java and C++ at the same time and do debugging and running and stuff. So you would have to choose your IDE depending on if you work on C++ or Java. But if you're someone that knows about IDEs and knows how to set up these projects and work with these things, then this is an area that actually could use a bit more contributions. So that's a perfect place to dive in if you're interested in these things. So please contribute more. Obviously, testing is extremely important. The JDK and Java is used worldwide in so many installations out there. And you really don't want to be the one who breaks it. So testing your change is extremely important. There's a lot of tests that comes together with source code when you clone it. Most of these use the JTREG harness to run them. You can run either using, if you download JTREG from the link provided here, you can tell configure when you configure the build which JTREG to use, and then use make test to run tests, or you can use JTREG standalone by just typing the bottom line on the slide here, the JTREG and path to what JDK to run and what test to run. The current source code also has support for the Google Test Framework. So there are a set of tests that can be used together with that, and is using it. Now, the Google Test Framework is mainly used for native unit tests, so basically C++ code, and most of the tests today is in the JVM area. When you write some tests, if you write new tests, which you should do if you write new code, you should always try to follow the pattern when you locate this test in the source code, in the source tree. The location should match the location of the code that is being tested. So there's the test hotspot instead of the source hotspot, for instance. These native unit tests are interesting because they don't really require the JVM to be running, or actually they don't run the JVM. So you can test data structures and functions individually without having to worry about breaking the JVM while you do it. Okay, so in order to find out more about these things, you can go and have a look at the OpenJDK Developers Guide. This will answer many questions that relates to how to work with OpenJDK and how to provide patches or contributions or whatever. The Developers Guide is still under development, so another way to contribute. You can help out with documenting these things. If you have some interesting tutorial or some idea or tip about how to do something, it's a perfect place to document these things. The OpenJDK Wiki has a lot of information about the different projects, and the OpenJDK website, as I mentioned before, all of the links to all of this information and process information and everything. Okay, so I think that's about time to open up for questions. And I see we have questions in the chat here. Okay, so what's the current state of the developer's guide? The last time I looked at it, there seemed to be mostly mercurial instructions. Yes, so as I said, the developer's guide is still under development, and the move to Git is fairly recent, and we are updating the guide, of course, for this, so to cover this and include Git instructions as well. But currently there is a lot of mercurial instructions in there because that's what we were using before. But if you want to contribute and write these instructions, then feel free to do so. Okay, what's the fastest way to get my fix into the OpenJDK? Okay, so to begin with, I would like to say that there is no fast way, as in like a quick path around or around the blocks to to get the fix in. Any fix needs to go through all the steps with reviews and anything like that. But fastest way, I would say, well, discuss the fix in the mailing lists. That's the easiest and only and best way to get your changes in, because you will need to get an agreement from the rest of the community before you can actually get your changes into JDK. How recent boot JDK is needed to build the OpenJDK? That's a good question. I think that it's like to build JDK 17, which is right now the current mainline, you will need, I think, 15 or 16, maybe 14 is okay. I should have checked that, but yeah, I think that's about it. At least, I mean, you already have EA builds of 16, and 16 is being released here, so it's easy to just download that. And so next up, you have the Ask the Java Architects. So you will hear Sharat and Mark and Brian, Michael and Ron discuss Java and Java future.